and welcome to Of Monsters and Men, a podcast where we talk about everything spooky and seductive. Today, I have my good friend Ori with me to talk about vampires versus zombies. Say hello, Ori.
Hi.
All right, so we're going to kick it off with a little excerpt from The Labyrinth, which is a short zombie story by Colin M. Drysdale. I stare at the row upon row of metal shipping containers stacked 3 high in the car park of the abandoned hospital. From within rises a cacophony of banging and clattering, letting me know that those inside can sense my presence. When the disease first hit, before anyone knew it did more than kill, the city's morgues had overflowed with the freshly dead. For those in charge, the shipping containers must have seemed like an obvious solution. Simply stack the bodies inside and then cart them away to some anonymous mass grave when the situation finally starts to ease. Only it didn't. Instead, it got unimaginably worse. Not only did ever more people become sick and die, but those who were already dead started to come back to life. Well, you couldn't really call it life, but they started to move again and to attack the living, biting at them, tearing their flesh, consuming them even though, being dead, they couldn't digest what they swallowed. Instead, their bellies distended, stretching their sallow, waxy skin until it split, spilling their guts across the ground. You would have thought they might have noticed this, but they didn't. They just kept on hunting and attacking and eating, dragging their insides behind them through the dust.
That's good.
Exactly, like it perfectly
That's good.
encapsulated the aura and like the energy of a zombie, and like basically why I personally like zombies over vampires. Ori, what are your opinions on the whole zombies versus vampires debate?
I don't think that it's right to pit them against each other because they both can be incredibly compelling in their own way. But the thing is that I feel like with zombies the problem is that the way I see the genre is that they are kind of limited in their way that you can portray them because there's like only so much you can do with it when every time you bring up a zombie it's either like sci-fi trying to find a cure kind of situation or it's like Apocalypse of Walking Dead trying to survive in a doomed world kind of situation where you can only replay a story like that so many times before you see the discussion and dissection of like the same themes and topics and like morality and etc versus with vampires because they still like retain their sentience and stuff. There's a lot more you could do with that because you can do like some sort of apocalyptic kind of society or you can have it more like in a modern kind of story.
Okay. So, I'm just gonna like rewind a little bit, mostly because I just would like to introduce the fact that we both are taking a course called Tales of Horror here at Rutgers. And it's kind of like what sparked this conversation. So I kind of want to bring back that lecture that we were in where our professor brought up the whole discussion of zombies versus vampires. Do you remember what ended up being like the overall consensus and like where it leaned?
Yes. Basically, so it was really funny the way that this happened because one of the girls, I was sitting in the back when Dr. Bennon initially like asked this question. Well, a girl in the back immediately went like, "Well, vampires are sexier," and that like everybody started cracking up. I don't know if you remember that, but
I do remember.
yeah, that was pretty
I have
funny.
it in my notes right here that during our lecture, it was very obvious that a lot of people preferred vampires and considered them attractive because after she mentioned, oh, they're sexy, oh, there was a lot of little murmurs and silent nods
A lot of noise.
that spread throughout the classroom, and I remember our professor was like, "Huh?" but it seems like a consensus. To me personally, because of the fact that a lot of people consider vampires attractive, I like the zombie better because of the fact that they are so grotesque and ugly. I know that a lot of pop culture really makes vampires out to be these like sex symbols or like just this like heartthrob, which just doesn't make any sense if you think about it because both of them are undead. Both of them
Well,
are scary in their own ways. So it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting concept to think about when they are considered attractive.
like okay, I think that there should be ugly vampires. Okay, I think it'd be really interesting because like Nosferatu is ugly, like, and he's intentionally ugly, and I think that's good and that's very interesting. But the issue that I find with the fact that vampires are supposed to be sexy and that zombies aren't is that I feel like in a lot of media, I commonly see the theme of like zombies have to be like freshly dead. I feel like the rule for vampires is a little bit more vague on how they turn into a vampire because like there's a lot of like iterations of that, but usually it's like bite, they die, and they go through like some sort of rebirth process. And basically it's like the similar thing like for zombies as well, where it's like they have to be like pretty freshly dead or when they're infected or something to like start doing like the whole like rising out of the graves bit. But my issue with that is like they're both just gonna look like normal people, right? Because a lot of the depictions of zombies is like they're half rotting, like exposed mandibles, exposed ribs, like large wounds all over their body. And really the only way that's gonna happen is if they were like in severe combat before they died and died from those injuries. But then isn't the whole point of a zombie being like a freshly undead person is that the body is still in good enough condition to be functional enough to like move?
Not all zombies, though, ended up being freshly dead, at least in, like, not every single form of zombie media that at least that I've seen. Like, in The Walking Dead, the corpses, like, came out of the graves like that. Like, they were, like, coming out, like, they were reanimating from, like, a death that happened a while ago. One of the major examples that I think about from The Walking Dead. But basically, in the beginning, the first season, I believe, actually, the first few seasons, there is a farm that the main characters come upon, or like they just find like this really really intact farm, and inside there's this family that's living in there. They're really like fighting and like protecting this farm, and there's a zombie on this farm that had fell down a well a while ago, and this body wasn't like fresh in this context. This was like a body that had died a while ago and swelled up. That was just like my little commentary on the whole like freshly dead thing. But I do agree with the fact that yes, it is typically how it is depicted. And yeah, with vampires, what I know of, I know most of the time it's like usually like this like curse. Because at least in the case of like Nosferatu, I'm pretty sure that he was cursed. This like king was cursed because he was such like a tyrant. So I guess I do agree with you on the fact that there is a little bit more leeway with like vampires than there is for zombies. I just wanted to bring up the fact though that like just going back to the whole attractiveness bit that we were talking about before, there are moments where zombies can be considered attractive. I specifically think of the American Horror Story season known as Coven. I don't know if you know that. Do you know that? Do you know
No, I've never even watched like American Horror Story.
Okay. Just to give some context, Coven is specifically about a group of witches, or like a witch school, so it's like younger witches, and they're all underneath this head witch, and one of them's powers is that they kill whoever they have sex with, and they end up killing the main love interest of this season, or of this storyline, and they're determined to bring him back to life, and they do, and he basically gets reanimated as this like stupid animalistic instinctual aggressive being. This character's name is Kyle Spencer. The actor is Evan Peters, who a lot of people consider very attractive. And they did not make him, like, all gross and decaying. So this is just an example of when a zombie can be attractive. And also, like, you could also say that Tim Burton's Corpse Bride, Emily, she's also considered beautiful. Like, it's a very beautiful character that a lot of people end up actually cosplaying because they find her beautiful. So that's just my little spiel on that. However, Ori, in your opinion, let's move on to a different topic here. Who do you think is scarier? Do you think that zombies are scarier, or do you think that vampires are scarier in terms of the horror itself?
Honestly, I think vampires are more tragic in their horror than like actually scary, but like zombies obviously they're gonna be scary. It's like it's not like undead person who's grotesque looking is like trying to come after you. Like obviously that's gonna be scarier than like I think that the issue is with vampires is that sensuality was like so built into their expectations of like how they will be portrayed, that you can't find them scary anymore. You know what I mean? It's like with zombies, you expect them to be scary. It's just, but like also like going back to the thing with Kyle Spencer, the reason he is attractive is because like sex was written into his character like that. You know, like you can't mention one without the other because that's directly like his cause of death.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'd be unfair to forgo that, which is why he looks attractive, which is why vampires are also attractive. But I think that we need to stray away from that for them to actually become scary. Because I think with vampires, it's like you're taking like a bite of like the forbidden fruit. With zombies, it's more like pure instinctual, like need for survival. Like you have to go, like you have to fight against them. It's you versus the world, which is very scary.
Mm-hmm. I agree with the fact that zombies are scarier, mostly because of the fact that they have this like desperate, endless hunger. Like mentioned in the little paragraph that I read previously, um, they will eat until their stomachs explode. They have no logic behind their desire to consume, and it's just baseless. It's quite literally baseless. They will never ever receive relief. Like, and honestly, I think about those with like in real life. I found a parallel with those who have like binge eating disorders or more compulsive coping behaviors because of the fact that like they have no control over it. They're eating to cope, but they're not really like actually like it's never going to help. And it just ends up overeating, overeating, overeating until your stomach is so like swollen and you're in pain and you'll never ever get that release that you want from it. And it's so similar to the zombie that I had to bring it up, especially since as a psych major I always think about like the parallels, and zombies really encapsulate real life horror of those negative coping behaviors. My whole thing is like I feel like that contributes to the vampire being not as scary as the zombie is because of the fact that vampires can be satiated and zombies never
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, for sure. That is what makes vampires more tragic than scary because they still have their sentience, but now they are having to battle with themselves against this like sanguine hunger and coming to terms with the fact that they're like permanently changed whether they wanted it or not,
Mm-hmm.
and having to cope with like the curse of immortality.
I feel like this actually leads into my next point very nicely, actually. Zombies symbolize, at least in my opinion, like the loss of identity, the loss of agency, the loss of humanity, and this, like, in some cases, this mindless conformity and, like, hive mind behavior. And, it's interesting that you brought up the fact that, like, there's that vampires are also, like, stripped away from of their humanity too, and the fact that they have to live forever with it. Unless you're thinking about the case of Nosferatu, then he dies eventually. As we said about the visuals, vampires can rarely be terrifying unless they're depicted as really, really monstrous, which in the most recent Nosferatu, the 2024 remake, that rendition of Nosferatu was definitely disgusting looking and freaky. He's ugly, like conventionally ugly. Starving because I know his body was like it was his skin was barely holding onto his damn bones. And also he was really really predatory and sexually predatory in that film. It's like really just repulsive. But the thing is, zombies already kind of naturally carry the visual trait. They obviously don't carry the more complex things, which I feel like I will admit like adds to the layers of the vampires, as I said before. But I still think that the simplistic nature of zombies makes it scarier because of the fact that they literally just are horror, and that's it. Like horror in its like simplest form, if that makes sense.
Yeah, honestly, I think I agree with you because it's like with vampires or like honestly with anybody that's even slightly attractive and portrayed in like a horrific way, there's always going to be people who are like, well, what about his psyche? Like, what does he think? What's going on there? And they'll always try to argue for the side of the antagonist, whether they like genuinely like them or not, just like to try to understand them. But I think that can take away from whatever the author is trying to say, unless that is the point is for the viewer or the reader to be thinking about what the vampire is thinking. But then at that point, it's going to be very obvious that that's what the author wants, which is, I think, in vampires retaining their sentience, you are losing your ability to like just focus on the protagonists and what they are experiencing.
I do agree with what you just said, mostly because of the fact that like the sentience definitely just kind of removes that little bit of interpretation, I would say. Like the ability to be scared of like the unknown, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of vampires like were told explicitly what their storyline was, or what their purpose is, or like what will kill them eventually.
Yeah.
But with zombies, they're just like, you just completely lose that identity factor to every single person, which freaks me out personally because I know that a lot of people, they like treasure their identity, or and they freak out about the fact that they lose their identity or they don't know their identity, if that makes sense. And um and I think that's why also when there's like a herd, or like there's like a huge like horde of zombies in these, in zombie media, in stories, whatever, that's why it's so scary, because of the fact that there's so many that's like, it's so discernible. Like you're like, were these people like even people at this point? It's like they're all like grouping together, and they're like not intentionally most of the time, but like accidentally like knocking over these gates, like super tall fences and everything, like walls of the house. In the show Kingdom on Netflix, which is a Korean zombie show, they literally would just eradicate an entire village in like literally 10 minutes because of how many there are and the sheer amount of them. And it's so sad when you think about it, because it's like all of those people were at one point sentient, but now they lost that, and that is so like horrifying. And it's horrifying for the people that also get killed, and then therefore they just keeps adding to the cycle, because those people that got killed will then just join that horde and keep going. And it's really horrifying. And I feel like since vampires are alone kind of most of the time, yeah, they are alone, they are
Yeah.
alone most of the time, they literally are like these lone creatures. That's like the whole, I feel like that's the horror of them, or like the psychological horror of them. I feel like it doesn't have as much of a visual impact, and I'm realizing right now that it's literally a question or a debate of visuals when it comes to both vampire and zombie. That's what I'm coming to the conclusion of.
Yeah, because I think, I mean, if you're looking at this from like purely just horror, I feel like a lot of horror, at least media, relies on the visual aspect to be what is scary, like with jump scares and stuff, and like the classic image of like the two little girls, or like someone like dropping on all fours and like running at you or something. You know what I mean? Where it's just very visually horrifying because it is a person contorting into this grotesque version of themselves, whether that be a vampire or sorry, a zombie, or like whatever it is.
I'll pick up off of what you just said, mostly because I need to point out the fact that horror, at least for both the zombie and the vampire, it doesn't necessarily need to be a literal visual. When we're saying visuals, we're saying like either a description or
Yeah.
an actual visual. Either or, so just to clarify on that.
I mean, I know, but I think with books, the issue is, or just any form of like literature, is that even if you are provided with a look of like the physical appearance of the character, you're never gonna imagine them quite the same way that somebody else will, or the way that the author might have even intended you to, which I think causes there sometimes, if the physical appearance of the character is really important, for there to be something lost in translation.
I feel like almost though that kind of adds to the horror of it, because of the fact that you're using your mind to interpret the words. And if somebody is very, very descriptive, it just probably makes it 10 times worse and probably gives people nightmares. But um, yeah, I guess that's everything that I have to say. So I don't know. Okay, so we kind of came to the conclusion that the difference between the zombie and the vampire and the preference is mostly based on aesthetic. So the fact that people mostly choose vampires because they are easily digestible, they are considered attractive, they are considered sexually appealing, while the zombie is grotesque and viscerally disturbing and visually just revolting. So people have a tendency to lean towards the vampire. However, in terms of horror, the zombie does win as they are just the epitome of horror in its simplest form. A
Yeah.
visual nightmare and an instinctual nightmare. Just loss of control, compulsions, loss of identity, and in turn a complete societal breakdown, as you mentioned with the whole apocalyptic aspect a little bit earlier in our conversation, while vampires kind of like they fall into this realm of more stylized fantasy kind of situation, which if you look into it, it can be scary, but I feel like zombies take the cake. When we consider which is more horrifying, I think I summed it up pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
Thank you, Ellie, for
So
hosting
yeah.
this beautiful
Wait,
podcast.
wait. So okay. Zombies remain fundamentally monstrous, and that's what makes them fascinating, horrifying, and endlessly worth exploring.
Well, I don't know if endlessly.
Yeah, Edward Cullen can get it. Bye.